position, considering last year they drafted the most valuable asset in women's sports, the biggest asset in women's sports. The idea that they did not have somebody in this position it's asinine, it's ridiculous, it's insulting to the fan.
Okay, so let me get this straight. The Indiana Fever drafted Caitlin Clark, literally the biggest name in women's basketball history, and they didn't have a health director, like at all. We're talking about an organization that just brought in the most valuable asset the WNBA has ever seen, and apparently nobody thought, hey, maybe we should have someone actually managing player health. This isn't just incompetence. This is organizational malpractice on a level that should terrify every fan. And what you're about to discover goes way deeper than just a missing job position. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this reveals a systemic problem that's been hiding in plain sight for years.
My issue is, how the hell did you not already have somebody doing this? And why didn't you bring somebody on during the season? The whole team turned into a MASH unit. It's crazy. It is crazy. It's no secret the Indiana Fever were dealt a brutal hand when it came to injuries they dealt with during the 2025 WNBA regular season. The most notable of these is regarding star Caitlin Clark, who experienced several soft tissue injuries during her sophomore WNBA campaign. She suffered two relatively minor.
So here's where this gets absolutely wild. Caitlin Clark didn't just deal with one injury. She suffered two quad injuries that sidelined her for weeks, then a groin injury, then another, more serious groin injury in mid-July. And we're not even talking about the ankle yet. This is a pattern, not a coincidence. When you see multiple soft tissue injuries stacking up like this, it screams one thing: inadequate prevention protocols. But here's what nobody's connecting: soft tissue injuries don't just happen randomly to elite athletes. They happen when load management fails, when recovery protocols are non-existent, when there's no one coordinating between strength coaches, trainers, and medical staff. You know who's supposed to prevent this cascade of breakdowns? The exact position the Fever apparently never filled. And if you think this is just about Caitlin, wait until you hear what happened to the rest of the roster.
At the ankle. Oh, here we go. But that's not all. Clark sprained her ankle while rehabbing before an August 7 game, which delayed her return timeline to the point where the Fever felt like she didn't have enough time to properly recover and return to the court, thus ending her season. Clark was far from the only Fever player that got hurt, as four other players, Sophie Cunningham, Sydney Colson, Aari McDonald, and Chloe Bibby, all suffered season-ending injuries in the final 2 or so months of the...
Did you catch that? Four other players, thus Sophie Cunningham, Sydney Colson, Aari McDonald, Chloe Bibby, all suffered season-ending injuries in the final 2 months. The final 2 months. This isn't bad luck. This is a complete systemic collapse. When half your roster ends up in street clothes before the playoffs, you don't have an injury problem. You have an organizational failure. And get this, the entire team basically turned into what he called a MASH unit. That's military terminology for when casualties overwhelm your medical capacity. That's what the Indiana Fever became, a professional basketball team operating like a field hospital in a war zone. But here's the kicker. One injury in particular reveals just how deep this negligence goes.
The season. Demarius Dantes missed the playoffs because of concussion. It's still unclear where that concussion came from. The phantom concussion, nobody... I still never saw exactly when did that happen and on what...
Okay, hold up. Dejanai Carrington missed the playoffs because of a concussion, and nobody knows where it came from? Nobody saw the play? There's no documented incident? This is exactly what happens when you don't have proper medical oversight. Concussion protocols exist for a reason. You need someone tracking every player's neurological baseline, documenting every potential head impact, monitoring symptoms immediately. Without a health director coordinating this information, concussions can slip through the cracks. A player might take a hit in practice, seem fine, then symptoms show up days later with no one connecting the dots. This isn't just about one mysterious concussion. This is about an organization so unprepared that they can't even trace the origin of a brain injury. Let that sink in for a second. And what the Fever just posted online makes this situation even more embarrassing.
It's absolutely needed, but it's also really embarrassing. Indiana Fever Senior Director of Player Health and Performance. Why the hell wasn't somebody already in this position? That's organizational, professional sports malpractice. Frankly, it shows a lack of seriousness.
So the Fever finally posted the job listing for Senior Director of Player Health and Performance. And reading through this description is absolutely infuriating because every single responsibility listed is something that should have been happening all along. Listen to what this position is supposed to do: oversee medical staff, coordinate athletic trainers, manage physical therapists, nutritionists, chiropractors. All of these specialists apparently existed in some capacity, but nobody was directing them. It's like having an orchestra where every musician is playing a different song because there's no conductor. You know what that sounds like? Chaos. And that's exactly what we witnessed last season. Organizational chaos that manifested as an injury epidemic. But here's what really exposes how bad this situation was.
The Senior Director of Player Performance and of Health and Performance will oversee the Health, Medical, and Athletic Performance Department for the Indiana Fever. Who was working with these players? Question mark. They're responsible for providing professional athletic training and physical therapy care for Fever players and staff. Oversee the Medical and Athletic Performance Department for the Indiana Fever, including full-time sports performance coach, athletic trainers, and physical therapists, massage therapists, nutritionists, chiropractor, and interns. Are you sure you didn't have anything but interns working the last couple of years? Provide clinical care based on clinical evidence paradigm to the players, including but not limited to.
Check out this specific requirement from the job posting. Provide clinical care based on clinical evidence paradigm, including initial examinations, diagnosis, evaluations, treatments, monitoring, and prevention of injuries. Now ask yourself this question: if this position didn't exist, who was doing all of that? Who was diagnosing these injuries? Who was creating treatment protocols? Who was monitoring Caitlin Clark's quad strain to make sure it didn't progress into something worse? Because spoiler alert, it did progress into something worse, multiple times. This reveals something most people aren't talking about. The Fever's medical approach was reactive, not proactive. They were treating injuries after they happened instead of implementing prevention strategies before they happened. And when you operate that way with elite athletes, you don't just risk one injury. You create a domino effect, where one problem leads to compensation patterns that cause 3 more problems, which is exactly what we saw. But the most damning part of this job listing is what it says about accountability.
But it's Jesus. I mean, the more I read of this, the more furious I get. Supervise and coordinate with performance coach regarding the year-round strength and fitness needs of Fever players, allowing for greater... my God. I just can't even... Serve as the direct point of contact of all team physicians, surgeons, nutritionists, sports psychologists, massage therapists, and a partridge in a pear tree.
Here's what's making fans absolutely furious right now. This position should have been filled the moment Caitlin Clark's name was called in the 2024 draft. Actually, scratch that min. This position should have existed years ago as a basic standard of professional sports operations. But the fact that they waited until after a catastrophic injury-plagued season to even create this role tells you everything about the Fever's priorities. They weren't thinking about player welfare. They were thinking about cutting costs. And you know who paid the price. The players. Caitlin Clark spent her rookie season dealing with injury after injury because the organizational infrastructure to protect her didn't exist. Sophie Cunningham's season ended early. Sydney Colson's season ended early. 4 players lost months of their careers because the front office didn't invest in the most basic medical oversight. This isn't hindsight criticism. This is pointing out negligence that was obvious in real time.
All right, they're currently hiring for this a new role created to improve the team's player health and performance after a season plagued by injuries. You don't think you should have pulled the trigger on this a long ass time ago? Nothing struck you in June that made you go, you know what? We might ought to get somebody in here. Stat. Y'all know what? Y'all know, are y'all familiar with that medical stat? Pronto. How about that? Does that work for you? Real fast. ASAP.
And get this. The job description includes supervise and coordinate with performance coach regarding year-round strength and fitness needs and serve as direct point of contact with team physicians, surgeons, nutritionists, sports psychologists, and massage therapists. So apparently all these specialists existed, but they weren't communicating with each other? This is like having a hospital where the cardiologist doesn't talk to the surgeon who doesn't talk to the anesthesiologist. You know what happens in that scenario? Patients die. Now obviously we're talking about basketball injuries, not life or death situations, but the principle is identical. When medical professionals don't coordinate care, outcomes suffer dramatically. And here's the question nobody's asking. If the Fever didn't have someone coordinating all these specialists, were players forced to manage their own medical care? Was Caitlin Clark having to schedule her own appointments with team doctors, then separately talk to the strength coach, then separately consult with the physical therapist, all while trying to rehab multiple injuries and prepare for games? Because if so, that's not just unprofessional, Maddist, that's exploitation.
% real here. If this league couldn't afford to have these kind of roles prior, this professional league should not have existed. I mean, this just goes to tell you, we're just going out there and I keep telling you guys, some of these broadcasts, when you watch them, they feel very minor league baseball-y. They feel like you're watching a AA team, local team on local television. And that's the look and the feel of the broadcast, and you're like, ugh. It's like literally, a lesser division of NC2A football easily. These high.
Listen to the frustration in his voice when he asks why they didn't pull the trigger on this back in June. When the injury crisis was already in full swing, when Caitlin Clark had already dealt with multiple soft tissue problems, when the pattern was unmistakable, and the Fever's response was nothing. They watched their roster fall apart and didn't implement emergency measures, didn't bring in a consultant, didn't fast-track this hiring, just kept operating the same dysfunctional way while players kept getting hurt. This reveals something crucial about organizational culture. The Fever's leadership either didn't recognize they had a systemic problem, or they recognized it and chose not to act. I don't know which option is worse. If they didn't recognize it, they're incompetent. If they recognized it and didn't act, they're negligent. Either way, players suffered the consequences. And here's where this connects to a much bigger issue in the WNBA.
For you to do this in June would have been too late. This should have long since been a thing. Tell me what you think. This is a gargantuan embarrassment for the Fever, for the league. I mean, just put some clown hair on and some some of them big shoes. Pull up in the little car and like the entire front office, everybody in leadership, they can all just get out of that small little car wearing their makeup.
Okay, this is the moment that changes how you see everything. He asks point blank if the league couldn't afford these kinds of roles before. Should this professional league have even existed? That's not just a rhetorical question. That's the fundamental issue exposing the WNBA's infrastructure problems. You can't call yourself a professional sports league while operating with minor league resources. You can't market players as elite athletes while providing them with college-level medical support. And this isn't just about the Fever. How many other WNBA teams are operating without proper health directors? How many other organizations are cutting corners on medical staff to save money? Because if this is standard practice across the league, we're not talking about one team's failure. We're talking about a league-wide crisis that's been normalized. And the comparison he makes to broadcast quality is absolutely devastating. Because it's true, some WNBA productions look like high school football games on local access television, which raises the question, if they're cutting corners on what fans see, what corners are they cutting on what fans don't see?
I mean, just put some clown hair on and some some of them big shoes, pull up in the little car, and like the entire front office, everybody in leadership, they can all just get out of that small little car wearing their makeup, their clown makeup. You know, somebody can stand to the side and hit the little jam box. Click.
Here's what makes this situation even more infuriating. The WNBA just had its most successful season in history, largely because of Caitlin Clark. Viewership exploded, attendance shattered records, merchandise sales went through the roof. The league finally had mainstream momentum after decades of struggling for attention, and the Indiana Fever, as the team that drafted the player driving all this growth, should have been leading the way in professionalization. Instead, they revealed themselves as an organization still operating with a Bush League mentality. They had the golden ticket, the most marketable player in women's sports history, and they couldn't even provide her with basic medical infrastructure. Think about what that means for every other player in the league. If Caitlin Clark, the face of the WNBA, doesn't get proper health oversight, what chance do role players have? What about rookies making minimum salary? This isn't just about one star's injuries, it's about a league that still hasn't figured out how to treat its athletes like professionals. And listen to how he describes this massive, a gargantuan embarrassment, where the entire front office should show up in clown makeup. That's harsh, but is it wrong? Because let's walk through the timeline of failure here. They draft Caitlin Clark in April 2024. She immediately becomes the most scrutinized player in the league, with every game televised nationally, every move analyzed. The physical demands on her are unprecedented. She's playing more minutes than almost anyone, handling the ball constantly, absorbing contact from defenders trying to make a name for themselves. And the Fever's response to these obvious risk factors is nothing. No enhanced medical protocols, no specialized injury prevention program, no health director coordinating her care. Then injuries start happening. Quad strain, another quad strain, groin injury, more serious groin injury, and still massing, nothing changes. The organization just watches it unfold like spectators, instead of taking action like professionals. That's not just embarrassing, that's a betrayal of trust. But here's the part that should terrify Fever fans looking ahead to next season. This job posting went up in late October. Let's say they hire someone by December. That person then needs to audit the entire medical infrastructure, identify gaps, implement new protocols, hire additional staff if needed, and establish relationships with every player, all before training camp starts. That's an impossible timeline to truly fix a broken system, which means even if they hire the perfect candidate tomorrow, the Fever are still going to be playing catch-up for months. Caitlin Clark's third season will likely start before these new systems are fully operational. And that's assuming they hire someone competent who has the authority to make real changes. Because here's the cynical possibility nobody wants to consider: music. What if they're creating this position to appease angry fans, but they hire someone without real power or resources? What if the new health director walks in and discovers the organization isn't willing to spend money on additional staff, better equipment, or enhanced protocols? Then this whole thing is just theater, a job title with no substance, and the injury problems continue. Let's talk about what proper health infrastructure actually looks like in professional sports, because the contrast is stunning. NBA teams don't just have health directors, they have entire departments with multiple specialists. They use wearable technology to track every player's biomechanics in real time. They monitor sleep patterns, nutrition, hydration levels, muscle fatigue. They have algorithms that predict injury risk based on workload patterns. They can tell you when a player is at elevated risk for soft tissue injury 3 weeks before it happens, and they adjust training accordingly. That's the standard in men's professional basketball. Now compare that to what the Fever apparently had, which based on this job posting, seems like it was basically interns and hope. The technology gap alone is staggering. While NBA teams are using cutting-edge sports science, WNBA teams are apparently still figuring out whether they need someone to coordinate their medical staff. This isn't a small difference in resources. This is a generational gap in how athletes are managed and protected. And here's where the player empowerment angle gets really interesting. Caitlin Clark has massive leverage. She could absolutely demand changes to how the Fever operate, and the organization would have to listen, because losing her would be catastrophic for their business. But should she have to do that? Should a 22-year-old player have to force a professional organization to implement basic medical standards? Because that's essentially what this situation requires. Either Clark and other star players start making organizational infrastructure part of their contract negotiations, or nothing changes. Imagine if her next contract includes clauses requiring specific medical staffing levels, mandatory sports science technology, limits on back-to-back games. That would be revolutionary in the WNBA, but it's also something that should exist by default. The fact that players might need to negotiate for basic health protections reveals how broken the system is, and it puts an unfair burden on athletes who should be focusing on basketball, not on forcing their employers to act like professionals. That clown car metaphor is perfect because it captures the absurdity of this entire situation. The Indiana Fever had one job: take care of the players who generate all their revenue, and they failed so spectacularly that they're now scrambling to create a position that should have existed for years. But here's the ultimate question that determines whether any of this matters: will anything actually change? Because the WNBA has a pattern of acknowledging problems without fixing them. They'll release statements, make promises, create initiatives, and then 6 months later nothing's different. The real test is whether the Fever hires someone with actual authority and resources, or whether this becomes another empty gesture, whether other WNBA teams look at this situation and audit their own medical infrastructure, or whether they keep cutting corners until their star player gets hurt, whether the league